everyone, it's Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks Pittsburgh podcast. I've been a radio talk show host for half of my life and nearly half of that right here in Pittsburgh. And so on my podcast, we talk about everything that matters to us all, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics, to practical day-to-day life. And today, I want to talk to you about the Supreme Court and higher education. Two rulings that came down at the end of last week, one on the issue of affirmative action and another on President Biden's plan to forgive upwards of $500 million in student loans to more than 40 million people. And the Supreme Court, we'll start off with the student loan forgiveness. The Supreme Court deciding that it's unconstitutional what President Biden was wanting to do. Now, the long and the short of it is simply this. The 6 justices that ruled against Joe Biden said that the HEROES Act that he pointed to as justification for this massive student loan forgiveness, that is not what the HEROES Act from back in 2003 was originally for. That is not the way that it was constructed. The HEROES Act, according to a story that I'm reading from in the Post-Gazette, was intended to be able, after the events of 2001, to attract individuals to come into the U.S. military. It was also used as a way of being able to help modify student loans. And when it comes to the modification, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration used the HEROES Act to modify. So what's modify? Modify would be, well, you owe a payment this month. Oh, no, you don't owe a payment this month. We're going to give you a period of time to where you don't have to worry about paying the loans back. That's modifying a regulation. What Biden was trying to do was to make it so that you just don't have to worry at all about paying that loan back, whatever the portion may be. And it could have been at the sole discretion if the Supreme Court would have come back and said, oh, yeah, what Joe Biden did was absolutely legal, then it could have been any dollar amount he wanted to come up with. If he wanted to do $10,000 and $10,000 like he did, $10,000 in debt cancellation, and then $10,000 more for Pell Grant recipients, well, he could have made it 50 and 50. He could have erased every single federal loan out there if he wanted to, if the HEROES Act really gave him that much authority. And the reality is the HEROES Act did not. There's no way that you can go back and suggest that Congress intended to grant one person the unilateral authority to forgive hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in student loan debt. It's almost impossible to even really believe that could be a potentiality. But that's what he was proposing. On the opposite side of things, you have justices that didn't argue the issue of legality. Their big quote that people continue to reference is about the disappointment for so many tens of millions of Americans that were hopeful for this debt relief and then didn't get it. Let me give you some examples. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote this: "We hold today that the Act allows the Secretary to waive or modify existing statutory or regulatory provisions applicable to financial assistance programs under the Education Act, not to rewrite the statute from the ground up." Now, in response, here's what we're looking at. Justice Kagan, writing, "Congress authorized the forgiveness plan, among many other actions the Secretary put in place, and the president would have been accountable for its success or failure." Do you know how she sees him being accountable for the success or failure? At the polls. That's it. What other accountability would there be? There wouldn't be any others. It isn't as though if this was a complete failure, we're going to somehow figure out a way of getting the $500 billion back from Biden. No, just political success or failure. And what kind of failure is there when you just promised 40 million people to forgive their loans? You came through on that promise. I don't know. The arguments being made that it was about buying votes. The story details about how it did encourage young people to go vote for him. And if it would have gone through, may have encouraged even more to continue to vote for him or to vote for him next time around in the re-election efforts come 2024. Justice Kagan also wrote that this court today decides that some 40 million Americans will not receive the benefits the plan provides because the assistance is too significant. What that has to do with anything, I have no idea. Michelle Shepard, Senior Director of College Affordability at the Institute for College Access and Success, quoted in the Post-Gazette, says that she worries about possible financial ramifications. The ruling comes as millions of Americans will once again be expected to restart federal student loan payments this fall. And the payments were first suspended back in March of 20, we all recall, with COVID, and was extended another 5 different times between Trump and Biden ultimately. She says here, I think it's throwing all of the folks into more uncertainty as the pause is set to end this fall. What uncertainty? You had a bill before, and now the bill's coming due. The uncertainty was the 3+ years of whether or not they were going to continue to extend not paying. Now you know for sure. You're paying. The bills are coming due. I'm hoping that all of these individuals who had student loan debt that didn't have to worry about payments for 3 years, that instead of blowing the money on the most frivolous of things, decided to set that money aside and then use it to pay off the debt that you have now that's coming due. I'm hoping. I think the concern that she has and others have is that individuals have been using this money to improve lifestyle. Oh, I don't have to make the student loan payment this month. I guess I'll go out, drinks, dinner, shows, buy myself some concert tickets, go have a really good time, right? I'm hoping they didn't do that. My guess is that many of them did exactly that. As the ruling plays out across the country, Linda D'Angelo, Associate Professor of Higher Education and a Faculty Fellow at the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh, said people may not be able to make major purchases or buy basic items as they struggle to pay bills. Well, they may not be able to make those major purchases, but that's not the responsibility of the federal government. That's the responsibility of the student that decided to go and borrow all of this money. They borrowed the money years ago, however many that may be, without the real thought process of, okay, how much am I borrowing? How much am I going to have to pay back? What are the payments going to be? How is it going to affect my life moving forward? These are all questions that you would think somebody that's capable of going to college would be asking themselves. And if they're not asking themselves these questions, why aren't their parents asking them these questions? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? This idea of going to a 4-year school from the first 2 years, freshman and sophomore year. Can you really afford this much debt? Do you think you'd be better off going to community college for the first 2 years? Do you really think that you're college material? Because my guess is, of the 40+ million Americans that have student loan debt to the tune of about $1.8 billion that could have been forgiven, that what we're talking about here in reality are a lot of people who never bothered to finish school in the first place. I know a number of those people. Student loan debt, no degree to show for it, but they have the bills coming due. Now, is that the taxpayer's responsibility? And say, oh, you know what? You made a bad decision. You went into debt for something, and then you didn't get the full benefit. Well, you actually did because you went to school for the 6 months, and you got the education for the 6 months, and I guess you did get back what you paid for it, but it's not going to be valuable enough to be able to get many jobs out there, although there are some jobs that do say some college required. D'Angelo also says it will have ripple effects not only for the individuals, but also for all of society in being able to engage economically within our society. That, again, is not an argument for why the president should unilaterally be able to have the authority to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars in student loan debt. That could be an argument to try to persuade members of Congress to pass legislation to do this because it's ultimately their responsibility, both Democrats and Republicans, to determine what taxes are going to be levied, what dollars are going to be spent, and Congress clearly should be involved with any process that would be about trying to forgive this massive amount of money and the precedent that it would send to be able to forgive hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars more. Matt McKenzie, currently studying for his master's at the University of Pittsburgh, is now feeling the brunt of the ruling. McKenzie has $20,000 in federal student loans, according to the story in the Post-Gazette, and now plans to look into other repayment options such as alternative programs or state offers, and if there are, more power to you. It's just another burden that's put on my shoulders, and I'm sure the 40 million other people that were looking for this kind of student loan relief feel the same way. Wait, hold on a second. The only person who put this burden on your shoulders, Matt McKenzie, was you. Nobody put this burden on you. The Supreme Court justices, the 6 of them that voted this down, did not put this on you. You did, because you decided to go to that school to get that degree, and then you said, when you signed the paperwork, it's worth it. This is a fair exchange. I'll get this diploma, and you get this amount of money for it in exchange. Don't play the victim here. There's no victim. None. Not one student can play the victim card about how this Supreme Court did them wrong. No. The Supreme Court did right. And whether you have student loan debt or it's a car payment or it's a mortgage or what credit cards, the only person who put you in that debt position was you. We do not have the ability in this country of hoisting debt upon somebody else for somebody else's benefit. Unless, of course, we're talking about the federal government, then yes, they can do that. But individuals, they can. Mar Kada could face up to $60,000 in federal student debt by the time he finishes his master's degree at Pitt. He heard about the ruling. He said he was disappointed. And I can understand disappointment. You're kind of hopeful that the debt relief will come. It doesn't come. There's a little bit of disappointment. I get that. But he says what really struck him was the frustration that came after realizing that the Biden administration's promise to millions of Americans was not coming to fruition. I think one big reason a lot of younger people were voting for Biden was this idea that we can just take the student debt crisis and not have to worry about it. A lot of people are feeling let down by the government that's supposed to help us out. And yes, the government does have a responsibility to help its people out. You want to be able to get from A to B, it's the government's responsibility to ensure that there are roads to do that, right? There are all kinds of actual responsibilities that the government has to its people. Paying off their debts or forgiving their debts with a signature of a pen is not one of them. Now, you want to go file for bankruptcy and get rid of your debts? Okay, I understand that many student loans do not give you that ability. However, you have other debts, you can do that. Once again, this is a situation of your own making. Now, when it comes to young people being upset with Biden, Biden made a promise. Biden did all he could to fulfill that promise. It was the Supreme Court that came back and said, no, that promise that you made, you may want to keep it, but we're going to keep you from being able to follow through on that promise that was made. Anthony Davies, a Duquesne University economics professor, said the plan could have had costly impacts on both the economy and higher education. And this is so important. The University of Pennsylvania estimated that the plan would have cost between $469 and $519 billion over a 10-year budget window. Every dollar in loans the government forgives will be paid by someone else. Think about this. Either in reduced government services or in increased taxes or in inflation. In the end, what really happens is that people who don't go to college end up being forced to subsidize those who do. And it's even more than that. The people who have gone to college and have paid off their college, they're then subsidizing those who go to college and then don't pay off their own college debts. Think about that one too. It's not only those who chose not to go to college that are in this situation, it's everybody who's still working, everybody who's still paying taxes, no matter what age they are. that went to college at one point and paid all of their student loans back, they too will be paying for the student loan debt of these students if it were to go forward. He also brought this up too. They cite here in the story, Mr. Davies also expressed concerns with a hypothetical pattern of federal loan cancellation. If the government began canceling more student loans, universities would likely raise tuition costs as students become less price conscious. And he's absolutely right. If you don't have to care about what something costs, you're going to go for the more expensive thing. Or at least you're not going to care about whether it's more expensive or not. Somebody else is paying. Think about it. You get to go on a business trip. The company is paying for everything. They say to you, whatever you want, hotel room, meals, entertainment, we're paying for it all. What are you going to do? Stay at the nicest hotels, in the nicest rooms, eat the best food, see the most expensive shows because somebody else is picking up the tab. But if you go someplace and it's on your dime, next thing you know, you're saying to yourself, okay, is it worth going to this hotel at this room? Is it worth it to go and have this meal at this restaurant? Can I afford to go to that show? Different perspective. So this hypothetical, granted it is because it's not a reality at the moment in this particular case, but it's so absolutely true. Universities, he goes on to say, will compete to grab as many of those students and their tuition dollars as possible by offering more low-quality, low-effort courses of study, which is absolutely true too. If you have all these people having all of this access to money, and all you have to do is open up the doors, find a chair for them to sit in, and you want them to stay for as long as possible to get some kind of a degree in something, because the fact that they come and the longer they stay, the more money you make. So you'll come up with really low value, low education, low effort courses in order to get them to come in and to stay there. That's one of the great problems that we have with higher education in America today, is that we have way too many kids that are in college, that have gone to college, that have failed at college, that are considering college today, that aren't capable of going to college. They don't have the academics for it. If you have a 2.5, maybe even a 3.0, and you want to go on to college, and you need all of the support and help that you need in order to get the 3.0 to go to high school, you are going to fail miserably in college because it's all about self-determination. You have to be disciplined. You have to make sure to set aside time to study. A lot of it is self-taught. If you don't have that in high school, and you've never had to have that in high school, what makes you think that you're going to get it in college? These young people aren't. And the parents are deceiving themselves. And I feel bad for these kids that have parents that encourage them to go to school, and they know they're not really college material. They know. And then they saddle them with this debt, and they have nothing in the end to show for it. Absolutely nothing. Some of the quotes that were made in regards to this decision to not have this student loan forgiveness. Senator John Fetterman, he says the court's decision was ridiculous. He says they're extremists. Our government has spent trillions to bail out big banks and the CEOs who crashed our economy. Our government canceled millions in pandemic loans for members of Congress. Yet SCOTUS is saying we cannot cancel some of the student loan debt for working people. Well, keep in mind something. It wasn't SCOTUS that allowed for all of those bailouts to occur. And the bailouts that did occur, they occurred with congressional approval. They weren't done unilaterally by a president who said, oh, you know what, maybe we should give trillions of dollars to this big bank and that big bank and this big corporation and that big corporation. No, it was something that was done with Congress. It wasn't something that was unilateral, and it wasn't something that ultimately the Supreme Court had to rule on. Student loan forgiveness. The debts are coming due in October. I hope that those of you who have student loan debts and your children have set the money aside and are ready to start paying this back, have already begun to budget this expense into your monthly expenses. One of the good things that's going to come from this, as individuals, 40 some odd million of them are going to start paying back their student loan debt. That means there are going to be fewer dollars to chase goods and services. One of the things you may be surprised to see coming up in the fourth quarter, inflation becoming more tame because there aren't as many dollars chasing goods and services as there have been up to this point because so many people taking all that student loan money and then living the good life. On to the issue of affirmative action. Story that's in the Trib that is a post of an AP story. The Supreme Court says race cannot be a factor when it comes to a decision by institutions to allow students to come to the school and forcing institutions of higher education to look for new ways to achieve diverse student bodies. So the argument here is simply this. The Supreme Court came back and said, you cannot use race as a tool of discrimination. You can't. Because if you're going to use race as a tool to include some, then you're using race as a tool to discriminate and exclude others. It has to be that way. If you have 100 chairs in a classroom, and then you're going to say that a certain percentage of those chairs must go to people of certain races, then you're telling those who are not of those races that you're going to have a harder time to get in and you're going to be excluded, not because you're not smart enough, not because you don't have the academics, not because you don't have all of the other qualifications. You lack one, and it's the color of your skin. And as I posted up on my Facebook page, if you're trying to use race in the way that they're trying to use it up to this point, it's discrimination, it's wrong, and you're never going to right a racist wrong of the past by creating new racism for the present day and the future. Now, what was clearly said by Justice Roberts is that it isn't as though you can't use race at all. That's not the case. But it can't be the factor. It can't be the point. Justice Roberts said that for too long, far too long, universities have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. And he's right. Listen, every single white person in this country does not have the same life experience as every other white person in this country. There are whites in this country that are experiencing poverty in the mountains of Appalachia and cities across the country and rural areas. And there are whites in this country that have prosperity that their children's children could never spend what they have set aside for them. You can't come up with one blanket statement for everyone who's white. And you cannot do that for everyone who is a person of color in this country either, regardless of the ancestry. Let me ask you this. Do you think that the young African American that has applied themselves diligently to their academics and have made it possible that academically they are qualified to go on to college, they have the abilities to do this, and they had to overcome some severe obstacles in the process as they grow up in inner city Pittsburgh, in the poorest of communities, maybe having the misfortune of going to a school like a Duquesne, right? And then you take that individual, and then you say that you have another young African American that went to North Allegheny, that is the child of a football player or baseball player, and has had all of the financial assistance necessary, and that the one thing that should equally qualify them both moving forward is they're black. No. The individual who overcame all that adversity ought to be given the consideration, and not just because of the color of their skin, but because of what they had to do to overcome, to put forth that effort, and to show themselves truly. I mean, if you can achieve greatness academically in a setting like inner cities around the country where schools are struggling because the parents are not as involved as they otherwise should be, as they're dealing with the social economic crises within their communities, the drugs and the prostitution and the gangs and everything. But you show me young people who have this academic desire and this ability to succeed. I want to see those kids be given the opportunity to go to college. Don't deny them that. But don't tell me and don't tell them that their experience is the same as somebody who is the same color that they are and then lived in the most prosperous suburbs in those communities, those outlying communities. Don't tell them that. It's an insult. So what's going to happen here is universities that want diversity, and there are obviously many of them that are going to want to have diversity. It's going to take more effort to find the diversity. Where before it was just, see this little box right there? Check it. And if you check it, it's really easy. Nobody has to worry about doing a whole lot of research and discovery to find out what people have gone through in order to be deserving of a hand up, little check mark. Well, now they're going to have to develop policies that are going to require more effort on their part to ensure that they give young people opportunities. The Obamas made it very clear that they believe that without affirmative action, they would not be ultimately where they are. What happens, though, with affirmative action, too, is that there is a built-in level of disrespect that is included in that. Because with affirmative action, the presumption is you're not capable. You really don't belong. You only got here because of, and it wasn't a thing to do with academics. Instead, if we change this, the way that it's currently being discussed now with the end of affirmative action, to what did you have to overcome in order to get here? Oh, you have a 3.9 grade point average, and you grew up in the inner city, and you were able to get that, and you had to overcome all of these obstacles, because all of that's going to be presumed now when you see people at campus, that everybody there deserves it. And, well, let me backtrack a minute. For those that would claim, and I think rightfully so, that those of wealth, their kids get to go because mom and dad can donate a lot of money. That's true. There are those that get to go because, well, mom and dad went to the same school and grandma and grandpa went to the same school. There are those that would love to be able to end that too. Like the individual who brought this suit in the first place, Edward Bloom, who formed Students for Fair Admissions. And one of the things that he would like to see come to an end is that preference for those that have alumni status and major donors. According to the story from the Associated Press, Bloom's group had contended that colleges and universities can use other race-neutral ways to assemble a diverse student body, including by focusing on socioeconomic status and eliminating the preference for children of alumni and major donors. Well, that one will never go away because no university is so principled that I'm aware of that they will say, we want to be diverse and we want to be fair and equitable to everyone, unless, of course, you have the ability to stroke a really big check. Then guess what? Our principles are for sale too, like most other people's. Not quite that principled. It's also interesting to note a state like California, I mean, you talk about the bluest of blue, right? Well, they voted against having affirmative action for admissions. And then when there was a ballot issue that would have brought back affirmative action back in 2020, they rejected it. So ultimately, when it comes to going to college, especially these schools that are of higher learning, the Ivy League schools and all that kind of stuff, if you have the academics and you have that struggle, then they're going to be seeking you out. Now, all these other colleges that don't care what your background is, all they want is a pulse and a willingness to go into a lot of debt, and maybe we'll give you a degree in something that you may be able to make a buck on, probably not. Well, they're not going to care what color your skin is. All they want is your money. Thank you very much for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. Please be sure to click the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. For more on me and the show, be sure to visit ManginoTalks.com. If there is a topic that you would like me to talk about or a guest that you would like me to have on, send me an email, mangino@manginotalks.com. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks. And once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and your family. Thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.